watching it. You see it on TV.
Where?
This is your life, from Kletsk, Russia to Fairfax, California, a 90-year journey. You were born in a small Russian town on February 15th, 1895. You probably remember well how your hometown Kletsk looked around the turn of the century. Your father Israel was a shoemaker, and your mother Esther had her hands full raising your large family. There were 7 children, 2 older brothers, Mendel and Avram, an older sister Malka. You also had a younger sister Peshka and 2 younger brothers, Matus and Jake. You remember how hard it was for your father to make a living, and how he served as a shamus at a small shul just to earn another 50 cents a day to help feed the family. Life was hard when you were growing up. Sometimes your father would walk 25 miles just to buy potatoes. The boys always tried to help. You remember one of your jobs was to collect firewood and build the fire for the stove on Shabbos. Growing up in Kletsk, you spent a lot of your time with your brothers and the rabbis studying at Cheder. We learned from Rabbi Younger just how important a role that Cheder has played over the years.
Time to become aware of the tremendous importance that the town of Kletsk played in Jewish history before World War II, and of the successful transplanting of this famous world yeshiva, the Kletsk Yeshiva, under the leadership and pioneering effort of Reb Aaron Kotler, Alav HaShalom. This gave me a little bit of understanding and insight into the kind of town in which you were raised, which is known throughout the world for its scholarship.
You still had time to get into trouble. Remember the time you were seen riding a bicycle through town? You remember some of the simchas your family celebrated. Mendel went to Tinkovich, a nearby town, and married Rachel. You and Matus could not go to the wedding, however, because the balagala cost 50 cents. Your sister Malka married Zochaim Schneider, a shoemaker like your father. When you were still a young boy, your Uncle Eli, Molly Cantor's father, took you to learn to be a tailor. The first 2 years you worked from 8 in the morning till 10 at night and made no money. Many times all you would eat for dinner was bread, garlic, and water. The 3rd year you were paid $48, and the 4th year of your training you earned $98. In 1914 you went to another town and made good money as a tailor, and you enjoyed the work. When the war started, however, the tailoring business stopped, and you worked for a short time in a factory making matzah. In 1915 you were taken into the army and sent to Siberia for training. By November you were fighting on the front lines in temperatures well below 0. 4 years later you were captured by the Polacks. You were nearly shot because they thought you were a communist. You became a tailor for the Polish officers, you survived typhoid fever, and finally escaped by hiding out in Tinkovich when the Polish army withdrew. It's now 1920, and shortly after you escaped, you were discharged from the army. You travel to a town named Slutsk, and you meet Yacha, a dressmaker there, and soon you are married. In November 1923, now 28 years old, you leave Russia with your wife and 12-month-old baby and head for the United States. You stayed with relatives in New York for a short time. The trip over was hard on your daughter Rebecca, and she died before reaching age 2. You decide to join your mother and your brothers and sister who have already moved to Minneapolis. You lived with the Rosenbergs. Hersch is born in August of 1924. You remember how people would talk about him after seeing him play in the window of the Rosenbergs' grocery store. You start to put down roots and open your own tailoring shop at 38th and Bloomington. You had to borrow $600 to get started, but it turns out to be money well spent, because you stay at that location for 21 years. You move and now share a house with the Lewis Carrots family. You live upstairs in the house at 806 Humboldt. On January 22, 1926, Babe is born. He didn't make it to the hospital. He was born in a General Hospital ambulance at 7th and Hennepin with Sonia in attendance. Your mother has been living in Minneapolis, and she enjoys the grandchildren. She lived with Mendel and Rachel at 708 Fremont. Esther died in 1928, and she was buried at the Gemelis Chesed Cemetery at 70th and Penn. 1929 brought a move to 810 Irving, where you rented a house for your ever-enlarging family. You remember some trying hours in the waiting room at General Hospital in 1929. Hersch, now 5 years old, had to have a mastoid operation. Little did you know then that not only Hersch, but also Babe and Bob would all be interns there. Your third son, Iser, is born June 14th, 1929, and less than 3 years later, Shamie is born March 9th, 1932. Then you go against the family's advice, and you buy a house a few blocks away at 1610 Oak Park Avenue. It's a huge investment for the early 1930s, $2,500. In 1932, shortly after you move to Oak Park, Yacha and Sonia decide to enter Iser and his cousin Alice in a brother-sister beauty contest. They do not go through with it, however, for fear that the judges will find out that the kids are not really brother and sister. Your next-door neighbors at Oak Park were the Shapiros. You became very close over the years. Nate Shapiro has not been feeling well the past few years, but he wanted to be part of your birthday celebration.
For hours. And remember what a great neighbor you were. What an outstanding man you are to have raised the family that you did. And to do it almost single-handedly is just, there aren't many like it in the city of Minneapolis, Mr. Shrugowitz. I've always been so respectful of your place as a father and as a breadwinner and as a hard worker, to see that your boys had a chance to become what they are today, and what they are speaks for itself. You got 4 sons, you got 3 doctors and a mathematician. That's better than the Rockefellers can do. So you're number 1 in our book. Oh, I got up. I used to sleep all day, work all night, sleep all day. And this day was around, I don't know, around 4 or 5 o'clock, and you were coming home. I had just gotten up, and your boys kept quiet all day so I could sleep. Mom would go over to them and say, boys, Nathan is sleeping, so please be quiet. And they'd be quiet. Not only themselves, but they'd keep the rest of the neighborhood quiet. So I took a bottle of 4 Roses, which I used to drink by the quart, and came over into your kitchen, and we sat down. I says, Mr. Shrugowitz, are you ready for a little fun? He says, what should we do? And I says, here it is. And I took the quart, we opened it up, and you got a couple of glasses, and we sat in the kitchen, and I think we finished the quart. That was a good day. I've never forgotten that. You were always a lot of fun to be with, Mr. Shrugowitz.
As your 4 sons grew, you sent each to the Talmud Torah at 8th and Fremont. For their secular schooling, the boys all went to Grant Elementary School and later to Lincoln Junior High. Yacha would bring the boys with her to the shop on Bloomington Avenue and help you with the tailoring business while they played. Babe remembers you never took vacations and even had to work on Saturdays to make a living. You remember long trips to Anoka and Osseo to buy fresh chickens, especially one trip in your overland when you lost a tire on the trip home. Somehow you convinced someone to give you and the family a ride, including the chickens you were bringing to Yalin the Sheikhet. Mesha, on Sundays you spent a lot of your time working for the Farband, or Workmen's Circle. You remember being elected as a delegate to their convention in Chicago. Yacha worked with the Pioneer Women and raised money for Israel. In 1938 she began to suffer a long illness, and she died on May 14, 1939. Your mother-in-law Chaika had been living with you, and she helped to raise your 4 boys. About this same time, you took on Mrs. Schoenfeld as a boarder. To this day, your sons still aren't sure where everyone slept in the house on Oak Park. You seldom had any trouble getting to the shop from your house on Oak Park, but the Armistice Day storm hit in 1940. It was the longest break from work you had had in a long time. Your car was stuck in a snowbank across the street from your house for 3 days. Times were hard for you, but your family always tried to help out. The boys and their cousins all used to sell peanuts outside University Stadium during football season. The gang would warm up in the firehouse at Oak and University. When the boys got older, they got steady jobs. You remember coming home from work late, making something to eat, and taking some to Hersch, who was an usher at both the varsity and campus theaters. Hersch met Yetta Light when he was 15. They courted for 5 years, and in 1944, while in the Army Specialized Training Program studying medicine, Hersch and Yetta were married at Bethel. Earlier that year, Babe was drafted and went to Portland, Oregon to serve in the Navy. Other members of the family moved away. Heike moved to Florida to live with her daughter. You continue the job of raising your 2 youngest boys and also continued to work long hours at the shop. But in 1945 you decide to give up the tailoring shop. You also meet Esther Whittles. You and Esther are married, and she and her 5-year-old daughter Barbara become part of the Schragowitz clan. In 1946 or 47, you moved to 2348 Thomas after selling the house on Oak Park for $8,000, better than tripling your original investment. Your sons Easter and Shamie have both become table tennis champs, ranking first and second. Easter is now attending North High School and becomes the Minnesota State tennis champ.
My mother played for Easter when he was in a tennis tournament, and he won the tournament. And they asked him, they said, "We're going to have a banquet, Easter. Will you bring your best girl?" He says, "You bet I will." They said, "Will you give us her name?" He said, "Mrs. Rose Shapiro." And he took my mother to that banquet as his girlfriend with all the athletes that were there and all the participants. And he was, of course, number one because he was the best.
With Nate Shapiro's help, Easter was able to go to the National Juniors Championship in Washington. In the years since you left the shop on Bloomington, you have been the shamus at Cher Sedek Synagogue. In 1947, your first grandchild Lynn is born. Your family continues to grow. In 1949, you drive with Hersch to Omaha for Babe and Sarah's wedding. You now begin to use your skills as a cantor and serve as the chazan for the high holidays in St. Paul, Superior, Wisconsin, and as far north as Edmonton, Canada. In 1950, you go to Elmore, Minnesota for Bruce's Bris. In 1953, Babe and Sarah move to Howard Lake, and in May of 1954, add Karen, your 3rd grandchild, to the family. 1955 is highlighted by the marriage of Easter and Marion, and in 1956, 2 more grandchildren are born. Babe and Sarah have Marla on April 30th, and Easter and Marion have their first, David, in December of 1956. Your family is getting to be quite large, and your house on Thomas becomes a gathering place for the whole gang. Who could ever forget those holiday meals, especially Esther's sweet and sour meatballs? The house on Thomas is not only open to your family for holidays, but whenever the need arises. Babe and Sarah return to Minneapolis from Howard Lake and live with you a short time while Marla is an infant. In the mid-1950s, a black dachshund named Hamlet joins the family. Hamlet always came to you for his morning walk, but never on Saturday. He must have known it was your day of rest. In 1957, Shamie and Patty are married, and about this same time, most of the family heads for the warmer climate in California. For several years now, you have been taking in tailoring work from Gross Brothers Chronic Cleaners and doing the work in your basement. But in 1956, you decide to get back into tailoring full-time and open a shop on Golden Valley Road. You are well liked in the community and are nicknamed the Golden Valley Tailor. You never had any trouble getting to the shop or delivering challahs to your kids for Shabbos. Your cars always started, even on the coldest nights. Some of us still wonder how many times you got up to start your car in the middle of the night. Your children's families really grew in 1959 and 60. Renee was born in January of 59. Shamie and Patty had their first, Julie, in February of that year. Babe and Sarah had a 3rd child, Marty, in June of 1959, and 11 months later, Easter and Marion have their 3rd, Joanne. Not to be outdone, Shamie and Patty have Susan in November of 1960, and in March of 1965 bring the total number of grandchildren so far to 11 when Stephen is born. In July of 1965, yet another member is added to the family when your daughter Barbara marries Lee. By this time you have decided that the Minnesota winters are too much to take and you move to Montebello. Most of the family has moved to California in previous years. The move also brings you closer to your brother Avram, his wife Sonia, and your sister Malka. Your nephew Sal is also living in California, along with Alice and Dick, and Bob, a hospital administrator like your son Hersh. 1967 is a happy time. You come to Minneapolis for a visit and for Karen's bat mitzvah. You have a chance to see your brother Matus, who had gone to Argentina to live after leaving Russia. The family continues to grow. Barbara and Lee have their first child, Rachel, in April of 1968, and just 18 months later bring the total number of grandchildren to 13 when Susanna is born. Lynn and Arnie are married in August of 1969, and 4-year-old cousin Steve serves as ring bearer. The Abramson family has been very close to you and your son Hersh over the years, and at Lynn's wedding they were made honorary members of the family.
I am having dinner with Babe and Sarah, and it was very delicious. And I felt very honored that I was called upon to wish a great guy like you happy birthday and tell you how much I love you. I can remember when you used to call me every yontif and wish me a happy holiday, and I really miss it. Do you remember when I saw your brother Matus in Argentina and I brought you back a picture? So many things have happened to all of us, and I hope to see you in California and have you take me to breakfast as usual. And if God is willing, maybe you will get here for Passover and we can hear you sing like a chazan, because I know you like to do that. And after all, you can be the Baal Tfilah, I guess that's the way you say it. Dear Hersh and Yetta, I miss both of you too. And please tell Bruce to get married so I can come to the wedding. And give my love to Lynn and Arnie, and who knows, maybe we can all get together real soon.
In June of 1972, you came back to Minneapolis for Marty's bar mitzvah, and you were asked to serve as Baal Kriya. In 1975, Karen and Neil are married at Bethel in Minneapolis. You participated in the ceremony, and during the picture-taking you attracted a crowd of younger women. During your visits to Minneapolis, you became very friendly with Rabbi Younger. You enjoy long talks in Yiddish. Rabbi Younger wanted to say a few words for your birthday.
Tragowitz, ich weiß, wie choshev es ist für euch, zu hören ein paar Wörter Jiddisch. Und etliche Mal schon hat euer Sohn mir gerufen, zu sein Haus, zu haben die Gelegenheit zu reden mit euch in Jiddisch, weil als ein Sohn, ein ehrlicher Sohn, will mit keinem sein die Mitzvah von Kibbut auf, zu geben dem Covid zu seinen Taten. Und jetzt die Gelegenheit von dem Geburtstag, 90. Geburtstag, hat gesehen, als eine Choshev Mitzvah zu machen für euch, a Tochnit, welche ihr wird können sehen mit euren eigenen Augen und hören mit euren Ohren, wie ihr soll eure Kinder ähnlich geben nach Covid. It seems to me that the great scholar and teacher Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, said it very well when he said, Ben Chacham Yisamach Av. Wise children cause a parent to rejoice. And by the same token, in the same writings of the Proverbs written by King Solomon, he also tells us, Ben Chacham Musar Av, that wise children are the result and the product of the training and the musar, the reprimanding that they received at the hands of their father.